Hey everybody, this is Mike, and I'm going to show you how to make tournament lineups for small slates on RotoQL. So we're going to be making lineups for DraftKings, specifically a 4-game slate at 8:05 p.m. Now, when creating lineups with only 4 games available, there's a couple things you're going to want to take note of. There's not going to be a large player pool, so trying to fit in all the salaries and getting lineups that are going to be like just as highly optimized as possible is going to be tough, especially if you start favoriting players, locking players in. So be mindful that you should try to get the best points for salary as possible, but once you start customizing it, it's going to be harder to do. Also, since we're making lineups for tournaments, one of the things that Sahel's really passionate about with tournament lineups is finding those value plays that can hit a high expected value. And but in these smaller slates, it's going to be tougher to find a lot of those value plays because there's just simply not that many players available. So somebody in these lineups you can see here, like a Jason Castro or a Pedro Alvarez, these are the lower salaried players. Looking at QL wire articles, looking at matchup and the ballpark factors for those games, you'll need to figure out if those players are going to be higher owned, and if they are, if there's a lot of articles saying that Jason Castro or Pedro Alvarez are good plays, then that may not be the best place to get value. What you're going to want to find is a lower salaried player that is lower owned. But if you can't find those things, or you don't feel comfortable having them in your lineup, it's better to pay up a little more rather than finding that low salaried player that's going to blow up. So let's get into a little bit of how to use RotoQL for short slate tournaments. We can start with insights, and with only a few different pitchers available here, it's going to be tough to stay away from Chris Sale. His rating only at 67, but seeing as he's that high price salaried pitcher, a lot of people are going to have him. This may be a situation where you should just go with him, and then a lot of these other pitchers, there's not really any other name pitchers. I mean, Chris Tillman's second highest salary pitcher, but doesn't really scream quality fantasy performances time and again. I think that the rest of the pitchers are going to be split across the board. So honestly, a lot of the tournament line could be determined on that second pitcher, so we're going to want to spend some time looking into that. And on the hitter side, we can just take a quick note on some of the teams that are being picked within Insights. This is a good indicator of possible stacks. And when making tournament lineups, even on a small slate, if you can pick the right team, and with there being less lineup combinations available in small slates, that may be something. If your correlated players hit, then you really could stand out from the pack. So you can see here that Baltimore and the Angels both have a lot of players showing up in Insights. So let's head over to the Games tab to see if we can find any additional information about these games. So the Angels game is the first game that shows up here, and the over-under set at 9. The wind blowing in at 13 miles an hour, so that's a little concerning. And the projected runs being at over 9 runs a game. So this could be a very, very hot game on the slate that a lot of people target. Maybe smart to take a couple hitters from this game to have some players that are correlated with a lot of your competition. But in terms of having a big stack, I would likely stay away with the win conditions being what they are in that game. I'm not necessarily sure that power is going to translate. Being in the Texas park, I guess that does neutralize it a bit. But for the sake of entering in a tournament, I know I'm already playing Chris Sale. I'm going to be a little different in building my lineup. So you can see that LA has the top projected run total, but Baltimore are also sitting there right underneath as well. So let's look at Baltimore. Headed over to their lineup, we can see that though they're playing in Minute Maid Park, so the wind's really not going to be a factor. But the over/under is 8.5, which is pretty strong, and Baltimore projected to score 4.7 runs, close to 5. So there's definitely a chance for some offensive pop, and going up against Doug Fister. So if we can get some players who are on the opposing hand, maybe that can be something that we can take advantage of. So the Chris Davises of the world, Matt Wieters, Pedro Alvarez, all going to be going up against Fister. So let's dive a little deeper into Baltimore, the Baltimore-Houston game. Let's look at Houston as well, seeing as they are going to be in this potentially high-scoring game. And some of the stats that you want to look at when building for tournament lineups, ISO being an indicator of power, performance, seeing as in this game are both right-handers, we can just simply use the ISO versus right-handers column, and you can see that Chris Davis is showing up, Jonathan Schoop for Baltimore. So and Manny Machado as well. So I think Chris Davis may be somebody. He's known as a tournament player, a boom or bust guy. And looking at his ceiling, it's at 35. That's one of the higher ceilings available. So that kind of makes sense as a tournament play. And then also looking at ISO, you can see that somebody like a Colby Rasmus, perhaps a Jose Altuve, also can hit the ball pretty far. Jason Castro, who we saw in Insights, that could be somebody to target as well. But for the sake of stacking, I am going to keep riding the Baltimore team and stacking around Chris Davis some now. And we're going to head back to the games tab to do this, but let's look at a couple more stats just to get an idea if there's any other players that we would want to target through statistics. And in looking at upside, how often is this player playing plays to the top 25% of his averages? And you can see that Pedro Alvarez is somebody that I think we're going to want to target as well. Wieters, both on the Baltimore. So we'll add those guys into our player pool. And then also, seeing as we are doing for tournaments, it could be helpful to look at ceiling as well. Ceiling, actually, let's sort by. Let's cut out some of the players that are do not have as high as a WOBA for this matchup, though it looks like the majority of the players here are going to have a good matchup in terms of fantasy production. And let's sort this by upside to see if we're missing anybody. Wow, and they really like Altuve as well. So we can go and add him for now. He may be a bit pricey, seeing as we want to include Chris Sale. So we'll keep that in mind. And then heading back into the Baltimore-Houston game, we can see that we have Chris Davis, Wieters, and Alvarez. I'm going to take Trumbo and Schoop as well. I'm going to be a little contrarian here, a little off the board. See if these Baltimore players will show up within if the DFS projections agree with a slight bump in favorite bonus. And then in doing that, I'll also have Altuve. And then let's head over to Insights and make sure that we have Chris Sale favorited and see what other pitchers get spit out. So then in doing this, we have more than a few Baltimore players. We see Adam Jones is showing up as well. So we have a full Baltimore stack, 5 players on DraftKings. maybe a bit risky for my taste. So I'm going to make sure that we don't have too many Baltimore players in all 25 of these lineups. But we'll get to that. So in finding the second pitcher, let's head back to the games tab and then looking at Vegas opposing projected runs to see if there's any values according to salary. And you can see that we've got a lot of these pitchers bunched up against each other, Edison Volquez being the second best option on the board. Looking at the predictions, it doesn't seem like there's anybody who's really different from the pack. Chris Tillman slightly more favored amongst these projections. We can sort by a slew of other stats to see who has the best chance of really playing longer in the game, who is at a higher strikeout average. None of this is really giving me a clear answer, so I'll head to ceiling. I think this is really important, obviously, for tournaments to figure out who can score the highest total, and that does take out Volquez and Pfister for me. I'm not going to take anybody who can't score at least 30, given that I'm going to leave salary on the board. So what I'm going to do is favorite all of these guys and see just sort of how the lineups spit out. Actually, I'm going to stay away from Chris Tillman. I'm just going to go between Santana and Tomlin and see how this gets mixed out. So you can see that Santana has been added to these lineups that are the highest optimized, and we do have a bunch that are filling up the majority of DraftKings salary, which is good to see. And even getting into our later portion of our lineup. So I think that's something you really want to strive for, is trying to use the most fantasy points per salary, and we've been able to do that, I think, by taking a little bit of a measured approach. But I did say that I wanted to avoid having too many Baltimore players, adding Manny Machado on top. So in heading back to two player exposures to round this out, I don't want any player taking out more than 60% exposure to minimize my risk a little bit in these tournaments. And you can do that easily by just adjusting these numbers. Now I'm going to keep Chris Sale relatively high, seeing as I think a lot of people are going to be on him, and it's just somebody I'm going to ride the public, ride the predicted ownership. It's going to be pretty high. I'm going to have him in the majority of my lineups, but let's move all of these Baltimore players down to 60% tops. So now we've got everybody at 60%. I'm going to move Chris Sale to 80% of my lineups just to give me just a little bit of a mix. And then you can see how the pitchers have shaken out. I've got Irvin Santana at 60%, Edison Volquez at 60%, and it looks like that we've gotten one of our pitching options pushed out. So let's move Irvin Santana down to 50%, and also Volquez down to 30%. And let's see if we can get some additional. There we go. We got Josh Tomlin now. I want to get him a little bit higher if possible. Yes. So we've got Josh Tomlin now. And this is where we've got to be aware of using exposure, because there's only so many combinations you can have that are going to fit these lineups. So with not that many pitching options available, that affects Chris Sale. So it seems like if I want to have Chris Sale in 80% of my lineups, I'm not going to have Josh Tomlin in as many, which is I'm okay with. So let's move him back down and bring Chris Sale back up to as far as we can. And also want to bring Manny Machado down a bit. So I will have to settle for him at 67 exposure, though I will try to do a little more pushing down. Yeah, so we're going to be locked in at these. That's sort of the way the cookie crumbles with the smaller slates. But so we've got in some of our best lineups, we're going to have Chris Sale, we're going to have Kobe Rasmus from that Houston-Baltimore game, Irvin Santana is our other pitcher, and a slew of other Baltimore hitters that we're going to be stacking as well. And it looks like that Baltimore-Houston game is going to be pretty important. We stayed away from the majority of our lineups from the LA games. So it seems like if that Houston-Baltimore game really does well and we can get decent outings from somebody like Irvin Santana and Chris Sale, we'll be in good shape. So our differentiators being Santana and that Baltimore-Houston game. And when you're ready to bring over your lineups, just select all, save all, and you'll have your lineups ready to go. So this is how you can work a short slate to make tournament lineups. Just keep in mind, as you can see, during this lineup building process, there's only so many combinations that you can have once you start favoriting and changing exposures. So keep those things in mind, but you can definitely find ways to create differentiated lineups to win tournaments.